already said hello, I'm Joke Butz. I'm a PHP developer at PHPro. I've been working with Magento since 2013. I've been working with it almost full time since then. And today I'm here to give you an introduction to Magento 2 module development. I made this talk for non-Magento developers, so you should all be able to follow. We're going to start really slow, and by the end we're going to do a bit more advanced things. Okay, let's get this question out of the way. What is Magento? Well, Magento is a commerce platform. It's not just a framework, it's a commerce platform. And I have a little example to illustrate that. For example, you have a client, he comes to you and says, hey, I'd like a web shop. You say, no problem, I'll take care of that for you. You set up a server, you install Composer, and you say, Composer, create project Symfony. You go to your client and you say, well, here you have everything you need to create a great web shop. Well, that client probably won't be very happy. Now, next to that, for example, okay, web shop, again, we set up the server, we do Composer, create project Magento. Next, you go to your client and you say, well, now you have everything you need to create a good web shop. Well, to be honest, that client probably still won't be very happy, but at least he'll have a web shop that has all working features and can start right out of the box. Magento is open source. You have 3 editions. You have the Enterprise Edition, you have the Enterprise Cloud Edition, and you have the Community Edition. For the first 2, the Enterprise Editions, you'll need to pay a license fee, but the Community Edition is completely free. It's also available on GitHub. The link is on the slide if you would like to know. And they're open for pull requests. So if you see anything in the core that you think that's wrong, that has a bug, or you think this feature slightly does something you think could be better, you can just create a pull request for it and submit it. The Magento team has a whole system of automatically testing your pull request, so they can merge it as quickly as possible. They also organize contribution days, and these are days where you can, it's like a hackathon, where you can work on the core on new features for Magento, and you'll be supported by Magento architects. So they try to really do the open source thing. Now, next question, a bit more technical. What's underneath the hood? What does Magento actually use? What components? Well, to be honest, it kind of uses a bit of everything. If you go look in the core, you'll find components of Symfony, you'll find components of Zen Framework, you'll find components of Zen Framework 2. So really a bit of everything. For me, honestly, when I started working with Magento 2 instead of Magento 1, the biggest difference I thought was Composer. In Magento 1, you don't use anything in Composer. Magento 2, everything you require via Composer. And this is a big win, I think. Okay, so we know what Magento is. Now, what is this module thing that I'm going to talk about? Well, module or extension or plugin, basically it's a set of files that make up a feature. When you install a Magento instance, you will already get over 120 modules, just as is. These are the core modules, and they make up the features that you'll get in a Magento installation. Next, what can you do with these modules? Well, you can create your own modules. Usually these are called extensions. You can create a Composer package with a set of features you might think that's interesting to use on multiple web shops. If you're working for a web shop for a client, that client might need some customization, so you can make a module specifically for that web shop. And you can also sell your extensions on the Magento Marketplace. Now, you might wonder, if I install Magento and I already get over 120 modules, why would I need anything more? Would my module being used if you already get this much? Well, Magento did a poll of asking people that have one Magento instance how many external modules they have installed. And as you can see, like over 90% have more than 10 extensions installed on their instance. For the enterprise, because enterprise also uses external modules, over 50% even has more than 30 extensions installed. So module making is a big deal. Okay, so we know what Magento is, we know what a module is, and we know why we should make one. Let's set it up. Let's look into a code a bit. Fair warning here, it's going to be really simple, very basic. We're not even going to do a hello demo. So the first question you have to ask yourself if you're going to make a module is, do I want to make a module specifically for the webshop I'm working for? Is it going to be customization just for this webshop? Or do I want to create a reusable feature? So something you want to install later on other webshops, or you want to sell on the marketplace. If your answer to that question is, okay, I want something specific for this webshop, you can just create your module in the app code directory of your webshop. If you want to create something that can be used on multiple instances, you should create a composer package. Now, next, what do you need? To create a module, you'll actually need 2 files. 3 if you use a composer package. I also created a little project on GitHub, the Magento module setup, that will have all the code of the coming slides. So if you're after the presentation or you're interested on how this works and so, you can check out that project. Okay, the first file we need is registration.php. In this file, we basically tell Magento where it can find our module files. Okay, and we have to place this file in the root of our module. The next file we need is the module XML, and we have to place this in the etc folder. In this XML, we register our module. We'll tell Magento what its name is. You always name your module with vendor name underscore and your module name. And next, you'll tell Magento what the current version is of your module. If your module depends on any other modules, you can specify that here too. Now, if you want to create a composer package, you of course also need composer.json file. Important here to note is the type is a Magento 2 module, and you need to require the Magento framework. You don't need the entire Magento project, just the framework is enough to create a module. Of course, if your module would depend on any core modules, you'll have to require those too. Okay, so basically we're set. We have our files. We can tell Magento, that's it. But we want to write good code, right? We're good developers. So there's something I would add to this setup from the beginning so we can ensure that we can write the best code we possibly can. So meet Grumpy here. I hope most of you already know PHP by now. It's a code quality tool that will check your commits. I already have seen a t-shirt with PHP over there. So he's pretty well known by now. And you can tell PHP to do a couple of tasks before every commit you do. For Magento module project, there are a couple of tasks I would recommend you set up from the beginning. The first one would be the PHP code standard check. Magento 2 uses the PSRR2 coding standards and also a custom set of coding standards that your code needs to be compliant on when you want to sell it on the marketplace. So both those coding standards I would add when you start making a module. Next, I'd also add PHP unit, because of course we test our code, and this will make sure that we don't commit any code that will break our tests. And the last task I'd also add is a blacklist. Because we all been there and we all saw our code committed and then saw something, a little line that's, oh, whoops, I put that there for debugging reasons, but I didn't really want to commit that. I didn't done enough code reviews to see that little line. I'm also guilty to it myself, so you might as well make run PHP check for those and complain for it. So now we have a module that's set up, and we also have a system set up that will ensure that we write good code. Okay, we're going to install our module. We're going to add it to a Magento instance now. How do we do this? Well, it's very easy. Every Magento instance comes with its own command line tool. It's been Magento. This has a whole set of easy commands to use, and you can also easily write your own commands for it. Now, to install a module, we need to set up upgrade command, and this will do a couple of things. First, it will enable your module, because by default, when you add a module to a Magento instance, it will be disabled. So first, it will enable it. It will run any database updates your model might need. And it will also register your current version of your module in the database. And after that it's done, Magento will use your module. So that's it. We have a module, we have it working, everything's good. So this is the basic. Let's go a little deeper, right? Magento uses a model view controller pattern. If you go look at the core modules, there are a couple of namespaces you'll always find. These are these. You have the block, which is defines all your block components to create your front end, and all the logic behind that is in the block namespace. Next, you have your controller that says the actions for your routes. You also have a module namespace, and this is usually all your data representation, your data entities, your repositories are in the module namespace. You also have a setup namespace. This is specifically for database changes you might need, like when you install your module, you might want to add another table to the database. All these scripts go in the setup namespace. You have your Etsy folder with a front-end and an admin HTML folder. The front-end is for the front-end, admin HTML is for the admin panel of your web shop. And here in the routes XML, you can define your routes. And then you also have the view folder, which also has a front-end and an admin HTML. And here you'll find your template files, your CSS, your JavaScript. Okay, next. We're working here with a platform. Usually you don't want to just create a new feature. Usually your feature needs to interact with those core modules, or you slightly want to change the way those core modules work. How do I do that? Well, you have a couple of options. I'm going to talk about three here. It's one, dependency injection, two, observers events, and three, something that's called plugins. Let's start with dependency injection. Magento uses dependency injection via constructor, so everything you might need you can insert in your constructor is inserted in your constructor. If you go look at those core modules, you'll usually find a namespace API, and in this namespace you'll find all the interfaces of the module that you can use to interact with that module. So if you want to inject something in your class with dependency injection, you usually inject the interface and not an actual class. For example, you want to use the product repository from the catalog model. Then you'll insert the product repository interface in your constructor, and you'll use that to interact with the module, with the repository. to let Magento know which class instance it should use for a certain interface, you can define this in the DI.xml in the Etsy folder. Again, you can specify this on a global level, but you can also specify this for the front end or for the back end. So you can say, okay, you need an instance, for the front end you need an instance of this class, but for the back end you need an instance of this class. And in this DI.xml you can also define some constructor arguments. Now, because you can define preferences for interfaces, you can also slightly adapt this to make other modules work with your code instead of their code. This is an example of a DI.xml for a class preference. So it says preference for, and then you say the interface, and then with type you say which instance it actually has to make for it. Now here it says, okay, for the address repository interface, you have to create an instance of the address repository in the from the customer module. Maybe your module also creates a repository, and you kind of want all the other modules that use this interface use your repository and not the core repository. You can just do this by creating a DI.xml in your module and defining a preference that says for that interface, use my instance, not the core instance. And after doing that, all the other modules will use your instance of that interface instead of the predefined one. In the DI.xml, you can also specify constructor arguments. Here we say for the type Magento customer model visitor, so for the constructor of the visitor class, it takes arguments, and one of those arguments is an ignored user agents, which is of the type array, and in this array there are 3 items. Now, because this is defined in the DI.xml, I can put this in my own DI.xml and maybe add a 4th item to this array because my module needs it. That's everything about dependency injection. Now, the next thing you can use to interact with other modules is events. You can create observers for certain events. If you go look through the core of Magento modules, you'll find a lot of events. There are triggered a lot of events. For example, if you save a module, there usually there usually is an event that says save before, save after commit. All these things you can use to interact with certain objects. To create observers and let Magento know that your observer is listening to a certain event, you again have to make an events XML in your Etsy folder. You have to define event, you give the name of the event, and then you say, okay, I want to create an observer for this. My name is this. This should be a unique name in your Magento installation. And you say which instance, class instance your observer will be for. For example, at the top of my head, you could have a customer that's saved, so you have a after save event for that customer. You could listen to that to get the data that it's new on that customer. I might use that data to send it to a CRM system that needs to know about this. Now the last thing I'm going to talk about that will make you interact with the core is plugins. Plugins modify the behavior of a public method, and you can use this to interact with the behavior, but also completely replace that behavior. It only works for public methods, so if you want to do something with a private method or anything, this won't work with plugins. You have a couple of options for plugins. You have a before plugin. This will run before your public method. It will receive all the arguments that are passed to the original method, and you can do something with those arguments before you pass them along again to the original method. You have an after method, which will run after the completion of the method you are trying to interact with, and you'll receive the output of the method. And again, you can do something with it and then pass it along again to the things that needs it. And then you have a combination of both above, and that's the around method. It will receive the arguments, it will also receive callable. So first it receives the arguments, it can do something with the arguments, we'll pass them along to the callable. The callable will return another value, you can also do something with that and pass it along again. So lots of possibilities to change or to adapt things. A little code example with this, plugins you define also in the DI XML. So again, type, you say which class you want to create a plugin for, then you define your own plugin name. Again, the name should be unique in your Magento instance, and you tell it which class it should use for your plugin. Now this, in this class, you'll have a public function starting with one of the prefixes before, after, or around. And then the next thing should be the name of the method you're trying to interact with. So here we have an around plugin that's for the validate function. The around plugin will first receive a subject. It will receive a callable, here the closure. And after that, all the arguments that are might pass to the method you're trying to change. Then, like I said, first you can do something maybe with arguments, then you have to call the callable to let the actual method run, and then you can do something with the return value. Okay, so we kind of know, if you want to start with module development, what's all out there. We know what it is, we know how to set it up, we know how to interact with the core. If there's one tip I want to give you if you really think about doing this, and I would give this to any junior developer who starts with Magento 1 or 2, doesn't matter, it's look at the core. You have to understand those core modules if you want to adapt them. You have to know what they do, you have to understand what they do, so you can, if you want to change something about it, you can do it with at least the least amount of interaction you can. It's always a good thing. So if you're starting on a feature and you know it's available in Magento and you think, oh, it's slightly different than what I want, first understand that core feature, understand what the code does, and then find your way in there where you can interact or change things slightly to make it do what you want. Okay, if you can't get enough of Magento, or if you know somebody who's a Magento developer, I got just a thing for you. This is just some shameless promotion, by the way. There's this event in September called Meet Magento Belgium in Brussels. It's 2 days, the 26th and the 27th of September. I also saw the 27th of September was another PHP meetup, but you can go afterwards to that meetup. You still can go to the Meet Magento if you want to. And the first day will be a contribution day. So it's a hackathon with core architects of Magento. So it's fun to learn things, to work with other developers. And the second day is more of a normal event day with, we have 2 business tracks and 2 technical tracks you can attend. So there's lots of talks, short talks, about 30 minutes, really interesting. So if you think about going, go to the Meet Magento BE. If you know somebody that would be interested, there are also some cards on the table, just take them. I'd be happy to see you there. And that's it, actually. That's my presentation. Thank you very much for listening. I would appreciate any constructive feedback you might have. So if you have any, go to the joined in page or come talk to me.